Hello, you beautiful human. This is the 187 Said podcast, and I'm 187. The 187 Said podcast is a podcast for men, those who identify as men, and those that care for them. I'm producing this podcast to normalise the conversation around many of the topics that have an impact on men. If you're finding the episodes helpful, then feel free to support me by sharing the podcast, talking about the subject, or even getting in contact with me and letting me know what subjects I should cover. But also, if you have a lived experience that you think is important to talk about, or something you'd like to share, all of my contact details are in the show notes. Today's episode is going to be quite a short one, and it will be useful to those people who probably go without any kind of support whatsoever because of the way that society will view them. But we'll get to that in just a moment. What I wanted to do is, really thank you for sending emails and speaking to me on WhatsApp, joining groups and so on. It's been a great help because it means that I'm doing something that's worthwhile. So I really appreciate that. And if you've got any comments, any suggestions, if you want to be part of a show or anything like that, then just get in contact with me. You can literally just send me a voice note on WhatsApp. I can listen to it. We can talk directly, or you can send an email, however you want. There's loads of different ways of getting in contact with me. And those links are in the show notes. For those of you who have written to me, you should be doing a weekly podcast. You should be doing a lot more episodes. The problem I have is that I work 9 to 5. I'm also studying, and it's kind of difficult to juggle the time to do it. But I think it's really important, so I take as much time out as I possibly can. And I wish I had more time to promote the podcast as well, to get more people listening. In order for me to spend more time producing this podcast, I need to find some kind of revenue or income stream. So here comes the begging. I work 5 days a week, study 1 day a week, and also studies around that, and then try and produce the podcast. And if you've noticed that a lot of the episodes are just me talking, or me monologuing, I think that's what it's called. And that's not because I can't get guests, it's because I don't have the time to kind of get the guests that I would like to have on the podcast. But that's being remedied very soon. Hopefully people have time to spend an hour or so just talking to me over the phone. Now, if somebody was going to take part in an episode, generally need an hour of your time. We would like guests to be from the UK if possible, or professionals from around the world, but mainly from the UK because it's a UK audience that I'm really talking to. I digress. So in order for me to do that, what I'd like to do is to be able to work 4 days a week, 1 day just dedicated to the podcast. 1 day, maybe a Sunday or a Saturday, I can dedicate to writing and researching and writing to potential people that I'd really like to interview. But what I'd like you to do is to consider using my Patreon, which I'm now rewriting. There are little perks, whether it's just talking, a bit of coaching, a bit of support. If you want me to be your agony uncle for a short period of time to talk, then feel free to do so. What I'd love to do is be able to do a weekly podcast, be able to promote the podcast to the point where we're attracting more, not just listeners, but definitely more people with more information to share. So, right, if you can't support the podcast financially, that's fine too. I'll keep supporting it. Then subscribe and comment wherever you can. Share it, send it to people, share it on Facebook, download the episodes, and definitely download all of the episodes. But listen to the episodes, comment about them. If you like the episodes, give us a 5-star rating. That would be great. And leave a comment. I would also say that if at any point you wanted to talk to me, just send me a voice note. I can call you back, and it'll all be via WhatsApp. Or if you want to email me, you use any of the platforms to contact me, not a problem. Quite interesting to see where you're listening to it, where you're coming from, how you listen to the podcast, and so on. So feel free to let me know that too. All communication is good communication. So please do definitely get in touch. So this is episode 10, and this one is entitled "You're a Perpetrator of Domestic Abuse." This goes out to somebody who has been told they are, or somebody who suspects they are and might want to see how they're being abusive. This podcast is for men who are perpetrating domestic abuse against people they're in relationships with who are either the same sex, women or trans or whatever, whoever you're in a relationship with. If you are being domestically abusive, this is the episode for you. And maybe, again, because we talked about domestic abuse or men who are victims of domestic abuse, this is pretty much the same sort of episode. But if you've listened to episode 7 and episode 8, you'll get a better idea whether you are a perpetrator of domestic abuse or if you have been abusive in relationships. And then we'll talk more about what you can do about it. And I think the first thing that we need to remember is that episode 7 and 8 will say that actually, if you're behaving in a way that's making somebody cry or upset, or making somebody fearful or have any kind of negative emotion, it's probably come from the way that you communicate. And I'm going to use something called the Duluth power and control wheel, which is something that within domestic abuse is used worldwide. 90%, if that, well, a higher percentage, should I say, you know, not put a figure on it because it changes all the time, but a higher percentage of victims of domestic abuse are women and girls. All right. Or should I say reported, it's women and girls. And maybe that's because of the way the structures are set up and the way that we expectations of what it is to be a woman and what expectations of what it is to be a man. And it's all about power and control. I believe that if you're causing trauma to someone, you at some point would be a victim of trauma because it's been handed to you. That being said, we're going to look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ways that male perpetrators of domestic abuse are kind of classified. The first one will be using intimidation. So we talked about the majority of perpetrators of domestic abuse being men, and that is because my feeling is this because society is set up that way. Men are, in a way of the world, seen as intimidating. So, but if we're using intimidation or making people afraid through looks and actions and gestures just to get people to do things, then you're being intimidating. If you're smashing things, you're destroying property, if you're abusing other people around, if you're displaying weapons or yielding your power over people, you're being intimidating. And that goes with any kind of relationship. But essentially, if you're doing that in an intimate relationship, i.e. somebody you're supposed to be in love with and care and protect, you are being intimidating. That by itself means that anything you do within that relationship is not necessarily going to be 100% consensual. And we'll probably look at what consent is in another episode. And then we look at using emotional abuse, and that's making somebody feel bad about themselves. So that's taking away the essence of someone. So chipping away at somebody's self-esteem, calling somebody names. Now, what you probably heard over the years is that the society has become woke and you can't call women love anymore and babe and honey and all that sort of thing. And men can sometimes complain about that. But to be honest, if people find it offensive, don't do it. That's just it. If people find it's not okay, then don't do it. What we have to remember when we look at how various groups are talked about, when they are described, they're described in a quite demeaning way. So you'll reduce, if women don't do what we want them to do, or if somebody behaves in a particular way, we'll call them a bitch, a slag, a whore, all these kind of things. So that sort of stuff kind of chips away at somebody's self-esteem in the same way that men calling each other puffs and so on. Name calling is just not okay. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me is actually bullshit. And that's the cornerstone of emotional abuse, is calling somebody names, making them feel that they're ridiculous for being upset about something like that, making somebody feel that they're mad, so they have to question their reality, hurting somebody either emotionally or physically, or doing something and then blaming them for it. That's emotionally abusive as well. So if you're doing that, you're emotionally abusive too. So put a tick on that one if that's you. If you're using isolation, stopping them going from A to B, saying that you don't like the people that person's hanging around with, or they're doing this wrong and they don't like, you don't want them to do this, not allowed to do that. If you're using the word "you're not allowed," I don't want you to do this, and then there is the consequence of you becoming intimidating or withdrawing love and affection and support, then you're isolating someone. If you stop someone studying, if you're not supporting somebody bettering themselves, you're isolating that person. If you're using jealousy to justify your actions, then you're using isolation, then you're being abusive. And then by doing all these things, whether you're using intimidation, emotional abuse, or isolation, if you're minimizing it by saying, I don't understand what you're so upset about, it's not a big thing, or denying that something happened when you know full well it did, if you know you're wrong and you still argue the toss, if you make light of the way that you're behaving, if you're not taking the individual's concerns or worries or upset seriously, if you're saying that the things that you've done didn't happen when you know that they did, if you say, yes, I did do that, but it's because you did X, Y, and Z, then that's minimizing, that's denying, and that's blaming that person for your actions. That's abusive. And if you're doing things like telling that person that they're a crap parent, if you're using the children, for example, to relay messages, or telling the children that the other parent is mad, or you make threats to take the children away, that's using children as a weapon. And as much as we've talked about mothers doing that, dads can do the same thing as well. Especially saying things like, I'll get the social services to take away your take the children away if you talk about what happens at home. So the other thing to consider is what's discussed or what's described as male privilege. Now, a lot of my listeners will completely disagree that there is any kind of male privilege, because women have got equal rights and they behave in a particular way and they've got this and they've got the other. And I'm not disputing that what you're saying is partially true, but there is an innate male privilege that is dominant across the planet. Economic abuse or financial abuse, so that could be stopping somebody from getting a job, or making that person ask for money, giving pocket money, or based on the amount that you set. Or you could be taking that person's money and not letting her know or have access to any family income. Anything that person needs to do for personal items, buying clothes, when it has to come and ask you, please may I have, that is economic abuse. And then there's using coercion and threats. Is where we make somebody do something on the basis that if they don't, you'll either leave, commit suicide, report that person to social services or whatever, or make an allegation, make that person do something illegal. You might hurt that person. Again, that molds into using intimidation. So if you're doing any of those, then you're domestically abusive. And there's no, I did it because blah, blah, blah. You kind of have to accept that if you are doing one or all of these or many of these things, you are using power and control over another individual in order for them to do your bidding, or in order for them to make you live in the way that you feel safe and comfortable. And you can do this for a number of reasons. And if you listen to, again, I'll point back to episode 7 and 8, who makes us do the things we do, and looking at our learning history, what we learn as we're growing up has a direct relation to how we treat other people and how we deal with situations. So where there's conflicts, we decide to use our power in whatever way, whether it's using intimidation, whether it's stopping that person going away, whether we're using male privilege or we're using our money and status to make somebody succumb to our will. It's essentially to protect our position or status, or not to feel lonely, whatever it is, whether it's the innate need to have power, or it's fear, or it's a bad attachment issue, or whatever it is. You kind of, if you are doing it, if you're doing those things, it's quite obvious that you know that you've been domestic abusive. And the reason why I'm making this episode is because I spent 14 years working with men who have been perpetrators of domestic abuse, and the majority of them are not horrible people. They've done some horrible things. The core of them is not evil people. Essentially, they've got terrible attachment issues, they've got trauma themselves, a whole host of things, don't know how to communicate thoughts, feelings and beliefs without using power and control to keep everything together, and have a fear of new or endings. Now, I'm not taking away the devastation and the effects that they cause when it comes to being abusive within an intimate relationship, because I can't do that and expect people to take male victims of domestic abuse seriously. And I work with them 5 days a week, 9 to 5, and the stories are just as harrowing as they are when I'm talking to women. The difference is, with men, it's probably more coercion and control, more isolation, more using children, more minimizing, but essentially more coercion than it is violence. If you are a male perpetrator of domestic abuse, or if you have been a domestic abusive, I accept that there is a stigma against you, and rightly so. You need to be judged for your actions, but not just the actions of the event. We need to look at why you got to that point, but also we need to take on board what you want your world to look like moving forward. And of course, you're going to suffer the consequences. Yes, you are going to be judged, but in the world we live in, if your actions are unkind, I think it's right that you should be judged in that way. But that's not the whole of you, unless, of course, that's the way you want to be seen. If you want to be something different, then first of all, you need to accept your actions. I'm not saying you need to go around to everybody you've been abusive to and knock on the door and say sorry, but don't minimize what you've done or how you've behaved. Accept the consequences of your behavior, and how other people have been impacted. You probably need to go and get some therapy, not just through your doctor. You go through a load of charities as well, but definitely I'm a big advocate for men getting some degree of therapy. And if you can get that therapy from another man who looks like you, sounds like you, then you are on the right track, I should imagine. But be very choosy about the counsellor that you choose. They have to work for you, and it's a very individual thing. I think you also have to look at the reasons why you communicate or behave in the way you do. Again, listen to some of the episodes, episode 7 and 8 and any of the others as well, and think, why are you behaving like that? Maybe your mum or dad behaved like that, your uncle behaved like that. Maybe it's because of the environment you grew up in. Maybe you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Your family were incredibly rich, you went to the best schools in the world, you got everything you needed, and then you in a relationship with somebody who said no and you couldn't handle it. Or maybe you've got such terrible attachment issues that you always fear somebody leaving you. That has led you to make somebody live in fear so they'll always be with you. There's 101 different reasons, and your one is going to be unique to you. That's why I'm saying get therapy. And once you've discovered who those people are who've influenced you to make you behave in that way, or your lifestyle, or what you do, or the way you view the world, and the way you view yourself, and the negative relationships you've had around you, for example, bad friends, social groups, bad political groups, bad community, bad, sections of society or ideas about society that haven't been beneficial for you, then try and change them. And that's easy to say, but yeah, just change them. If you want something bad enough, then that's what you have to do. You change the negative stuff that's around you. And it might mean moving. It might be ending a relationship. It might be ending a job. It might be cutting family ties. It might be getting support for some sort of addiction. And I'm not just talking about drink or drugs. I'm talking about anything that has an impact on the way you relate to yourself and those people around you. And once you've gone through that process of what I term as cleaning house, and everything's not necessarily spick and span, because none of us can be biblically clean, so to speak, I think you're hopefully going to look at yourself to a certain degree and like yourself. And when you like yourself, then maybe you might relate to people differently. You might want a different set of people around you. But if you then make a promise to yourself, having done all of that bloody hard work, then don't let somebody in your circle that's going to erode all of the hard work that you've done. And then you might be in a position to rekindle those relationships that are in tatters. If people want to communicate with you, and that I'm talking about exes or children, family members and so on, then be prepared for that. It's going to be a difficult thing. But also you have to be prepared for the fact that they might not want anything to do with you. And if you can learn to accept that ending, then surely that's a good thing. But you have to get to the point where there's kind of self-acceptance. And I'm not saying this because I've had academic literature and so on. I'm saying this because of delivering 4 groups a week, and each group has 10 men in it, and doing that for 14 years, that's got to be well over 1,000 people. I should do the maths, Rich, actually. 1,000 men actually saying, this is how I think and feel. This is how I got to be in a therapy group. This is how I ended up going to prison. This is how I ended up losing my friends. This is how I ended up losing my family. This is how I ended up losing my partner. So that's why I'm making this episode. No one's going to really want to speak about or speak to men who have been domestically abusive. You're going to have a lot of work to do, my friend, or a lot of horrible boxes to open and looking at the stuff inside. And there's going to be anger and regret, shame and embarrassment. But you take on all that and you'll be a lot better when you come out the other side. Be kind to yourself. Because if you're going to do this work, it's going to be the betterment of you and any relationships you have now and in the future. I say all of that to say this: if you have been domestically abusive and you're in the UK and you need to find out what you can do about it, then feel free to get in touch. But there are going to be programs for you. If you're having to attend probation, then you probably want to do Building Better Relationships program. If there may be some other programs that you can take part in, but essentially, yes, you do need some therapy, and probably bin those people that have caused you the trauma that makes you behave in a traumatic way. I hope you find this useful. Feel free, as I say, if you agree or disagree, get in touch. Use the show notes. Send me a WhatsApp. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. And wherever you listen to this podcast, please subscribe, like, or leave a comment.